Alleluia. Om Mani Padme Om. Allah Satnam.
Welcome to Harmony and Diversity. Norm Currie is my name, and today we're talking again to Freeman Trebilcock, who is a Buddhist monk. Thank you, Freeman.
Thank you, Norm.
Part of what this series is about is to actually bring people's faith into practical action in the world. Where does it happen? And I'm aware of some things that you're involved in, and we'll discuss those. The first of those is the Loving Kindness Network. What's that?
So the Loving Kindness Network, or it was originally called Loving Kindness Peaceful Youth, originated actually from one of my Buddhist teachers, Lama Zopa Rinpoche. He was visiting America during the time of the Columbine school shootings, and at that time there was a lot of conversation in the media around the music that the kids were listening to, about the access to guns, things like that, but no one was talking about what was impelling these children to actually do the acts in terms of their own minds, and in terms of the anger that they had, in terms of the lack of compassion for the people who, I guess, were in their school. And so out of that, this organization was born with the values of trying to create a more peaceful world by transforming ourselves, by working with our own minds, I guess, in order to disarm our own aggression. So it's really a peace organization, but with a focus on starting with yourself first.
So how did that manifest itself? Did it manifest itself at Columbine? Was that where it started?
I mean, look, it really took a while for anyone to take hold of the idea. I first heard about the idea through Lama Zopa, and then met up with some other young people that I knew here in Australia, and we started it here. And since that time, the organisation has grown internationally, but not in any kind of controlled way. When we're not out there at the moment trying to, launch in a new country every week. What we've provided is some really useful tools for young people particularly, to, explore their own psychology, develop positive qualities particularly, because, there's no use to saying we need to be less violent. We need to work on the qualities that are, in opposition to those violent ones. So qualities such as patience, humility, things like that. But also empowering qualities such as courage, the ability to actually deal with sort of difficult situations. So the organisation now, we have small groups called habit groups, and habits are started by a young person who sees a need in their community, and it's just kind of almost like a youth group model, but where young people bring others together once a week or once a fortnight to do some activities. But it's got a real focus on cultivating the inner world and the warm-heartedness and the inner values in a very secular way. So Loving Kindness Peaceful Youth is not a Buddhist organisation. You don't have to be Buddhist. Okay. I mean, it's got Buddhist roots, but you don't have to be a Buddhist to participate. Okay. It's just about the cultivation of sort of certain positive qualities. So there's habit groups now I think there's about 10 habit groups in Mexico. It's really taken off in Mexico. I think because I visited there last year, I think it's because of it's quite a violent society. Yes. And they're struggling at the moment with, the drug cartels at war, and it's quite. I think people are really searching for that kind of positive transformation in their communities. So it's really big there. We've got ones dotted around Europe as well. There's one in Hungary, Denmark, Norway. There's a couple here in Australia. There's not one in the US yet, surprisingly so. So we're waiting for someone to stick their hand up and start one, because it comes out of that context originally with Columbine.
How does it, as you say, it's secular. How do you get people interested in the first place? What's the seed that's sown for them?
It's actually a challenge. It's really not easy, and I don't think there's a magic bullet to mix
so to
metaphors,
speak.
so to speak, for a peace organisation. Oh dear. I think look, I've thought a lot about this actually, and I still think our branding is not quite right. The moment we're saying to people, be peaceful, be tolerant, but actually, I think the only way that you're going to get young people involved is if the message has to be more powerful and more compelling than the message that our world is currently selling young people, which is a message about fame and self-aggrandizement and kind of almost hedonistic kind of message.
Yes.
Whereas we need to be promoting a message of you don't need to be a consumer of things to be happy. You can actually produce your own well-being. You can become a producer. You can be empowered and strong. And I mean I think that message needs to be the focus. At the moment, I think the communication at the moment is not quite right for loving kindness, peaceful youth. So we're still working on that. But I honestly believe that people need this material, and getting it to young people in whatever way, I think that's a really important task. So
it certainly is, and I would imagine that some of the people who are attracted are they refugees from drug addiction.
There are some. I know that in the Mexico groups, there's a few people there who've had difficult lives, maybe sort of almost got mixed up in sort of serious crime. Not quite, but on the edge. In Australia, our groups have really more been focused on young people who are just confused and searching.
Yes.
And so I think the urgency of a peace organisation isn't as strong in Australia as it is in somewhere like Mexico, because of you have this violence in your streets in Mexico, and there's not so much. I mean, there's not as much violence here. But what I think is a resonant message here is the culture which underlies that kind of overt violence, which looks. I mean, on an internal level, it's much more subtle, but it's things like bullying. It's things like people manipulating one another and abusing one another, and that happens, I think, a lot, and we see that a lot in our experiences. And maybe the high levels of suicide that you see amongst young people relates to that culture of violence, and maybe even self-hatred. Young people, they struggle. They really. I've seen it. 'Cause, I mean, a lot of my friends have struggled growing up with their own issues, and a lot of, I guess, self-loathing and we call it lack of self-esteem, but it's really just being down on yourself. So young people in Australia do need that as well.
They certainly do, and we also need more time because we're going to go to a break, and we shall return shortly.
Om Mani Padme. Alleluia. Om Mani Padme.
You're watching Harmony and Diversity. Norm Currie is my name, and we're speaking to Freeman, who is a Tibetan Buddhist monk. Freeman, you've been involved, we've just discussed your involvement with Loving Kindness Network, which is fascinating in its own right. You're also are you still the Regional Youth Ambassador for the United Religions Initiative?
I think I may have graduated, but I think they've let me go now. So I think they've got a new batch in. They've got a new batch in by now. But yeah, I was the URI Regional Youth Ambassador. United Religions Initiative is a very grassroots interfaith organisation. So they have groups all around the world.
Yes.
And they're really focusing on getting more young people involved in interfaith now, I think. So it's a really good thing to see.
And is that big in Australia, or is it sort of...
So URI has what it calls cooperation circles around the world. So any group of people, I think you have to have people from 3 or more faiths, and including atheists that can
can also
be in there as well. So that's really important in Australia particularly. So 3 or more religions, you get people together and you form a group, a cooperation circle, and you just sign on to the charter of United Religions Initiative and become part of their movement, I guess. I think they have 470 cooperation circles around the world now, of which Interaction, my organisation, is one.
You mentioned before we were looking at the Loving Kindness networks that there's quite a few in Australia and in Europe, not America, and a few in quite a few in Mexico.
Yeah.
And we're now, you're saying that in Australia it's really important to have the capacity to include non-religious people. What is it about Australia? Why would that be the case? If that is the case, why have we got this network taking off here? What do you think's the driver?
That's a really interesting question. I think it would take a long time to pull that one apart. I'd like to talk about two different things related to that.
Yeah.
One, there is a strong interfaith movement of people from all different religions who are, I guess, called to work together. It's quite a progressive movement, and that movement, I think, has excluded non-religious people.
Yes.
And that's something that needs to change, I think, if we're going to move forwards. But secondly, there is this I think there's sort of an antagonism from the secular world about religion, and it's not universal, obviously, but I mean, it's quite a dominant narrative that I guess religion is old school, is archaic, doesn't have a role to play in our world. And so you have those two conversations happening separately. So there's the secular people who are trying to, I guess, not even thinking about religion probably, and then the interfaith people who are trying to progress religion and move it forwards, but not talking to the non-religious people. So I think there's a concern there, because I think some of the most exciting things are coming out of those interfaith organisations, as well as the secular organisations like peace organisations, or, for example, the Oak Tree Foundation is a charity based here in Australia that work on poverty. Now they've got Christian roots, but they almost hide that completely because they're working with the secular world and trying to, do mainstream change and do things like that. I think if people who are strongly embedded in their faith have a serious conversation with the secular mainstream, and that conversation can be two-way, then you have this great possibility of spiritually informed change in a really powerfully deeply motivated change, in a pluralistic way that is completely open, and also open up to non-religious people as well. So I mean, I hope I unpacked what I think needs to happen there, but. Yeah,
well, you certainly have. There's this existence of this spiritual no man's land in the middle, and a lot of youth are in that. So is it a Buddhist perspective, or is it a personal one with the organisations you're involved in, where you consciously involve people who might describe themselves loosely as atheists? Is that it?
Well, this is a good question. Is it a Buddhist thing to work with I mean, if you want to be technical about it, Buddhists are atheists.
Yes.
If you're very technical.
Yes.
Which is that we don't talk about a creative God. We do talk about an all-loving, all-knowing kind of, all-knowing consciousness. But we don't talk about a created God. So you could technically say we're atheists. I think Buddhism has appealed maybe to atheists more.
Yes.
Because we have rules against trying to convert people, like it's not on. And I'm sure some people still do it, and I know of partners who wanted their dearly beloved to become a Buddhist, so they've left Buddhist books lying around the house and stuff. So I'm sure it does happen, but I think Buddhism has a pretty good brand because we don't try and promote and I guess pitch the religion to non-believers. So I think there's a lot of people who walk into it quite openly because there's no threat there. So I think Buddhism and atheism go quite hand in hand. They're not contradictory.
Yes, that's a subtle point, but you're correct, and that is why these young people can feel more comfortable with that. But at that level of as you said, the spiritual interface between the secular and the religious, the generation of awareness in that space. What do you think the engine is for getting the best effect from that, apart from being a Buddhist?
The engine of awareness. That's a beautiful term. I think you can't be dishonest to people's experience. I think a lot of the issue at the moment with religion's relevance is it doesn't meet people at where they're at, which is a kind of a really dark, kind of dirty, damaged place, really, for a lot of people. That's a lot of young people's experience. So if you're going to connect with people with spiritual wisdom, you've got to say, look, this is where we begin. Life is a shit, like there's...
Yes.
And young people think like they're the one with the problem, and that like they're too bad for like improvement.
Yes.
So you've got to
Yes.
start with where they're at, I think, and then
Yes.
you can grow and help them cultivate.
Yeah, that's a very powerful perspective, and it certainly gives a reason for why Buddhist groups are spreading throughout commerce and industry. Lots of people have these Buddhist groups at lunchtime, etc. Talking about lunchtime,
Yeah.
it's time for a break, and we will return shortly.
Mani Allah. Alleluia. Mani Allah.
Welcome back to Harmony and Diversity. Norm Currie is my name, and I'm speaking with Freeman, who is a Buddhist monk, a Tibetan Buddhist monk. We've covered some fascinating stuff, Freeman, and you are active again in a group called Interaction. Tell us about that.
So we started Interaction basically with the vision that amongst our diverse religious traditions, there was a common theme, and that common theme was about compassion and about altruism and service to others. So we started that organisation a few years ago. I guess we didn't know quite what we wanted to do, but we knew that we wanted to get our hands dirty, actually do the kinds of things that our religions called us to do and inspired us to do. So we did sort of community service projects, we ran a clothing drive, we did things like that. And eventually we realized that there were lots of other young people like us who were out there who was feeling confused about their religious tradition, wanted a way, I guess, to translate this tradition into the modern world and make it useful, make it relevant. And so we began running workshops with other young people to help them, I guess, reflect a bit more deeply on the wisdom within their own faith tradition and how that called them to lead lives more filled with compassion and empathy and kindness and so forth. So that we've been running those workshops now for over a year, and I can tell you people are truly inspired by the opportunity to actually look at this more deeply. I think in our society that space doesn't really exist. If it's, you can't have a space, you can't have a conversation about religion with your mates, and if you go to a religious organisation, the conversation is not usually a very open one.
No.
And so to have that space amongst peers, that's been the most valuable thing we've found.
So those, looking at your website, I underlined, in fact, people to bring their shared values and going back to the agnostic or the atheist at the extreme. Do you attract them as well?
About 30% of the people who do our workshops are still atheists or searching, still not sure. And I think that reflects Australia's young people. Actually, I think there is actually quite a larger group of non-religious young people. I think it's probably more like 60 or 70% if you look at the data of people who are non-religious or still seeking or figuring it out for themselves, which is huge. And that's bigger than the older generation, which I think the older generation is about 30 or 40% non-religious or no belief, or they don't answer on the census. So basically, I think having young people who are not religious as part of that conversation is absolutely essential.
Absolutely.
And they benefit, but also the religious people benefit because it doesn't become cliquey. It's not all about, our one belief in God. It actually becomes a bit more like the real fundamental things that we share.
Yeah, it's interesting in putting in a Christian context and talking about a church. It actually, the church has regurgitated itself out into the community, and it's actually living in the community rather than in the church. That seems to be, as I say, from a strictly Christian perspective.
It's almost like community has replaced church.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
But the problem I think with that is that where's the space for deep reflection in community? It's quite hard to find, I think. There's a lot of activity.
Yes.
But I think religious traditions, and also the techniques and the technicians, the people who, I'm a monk, right, so I'm maybe trying to be biased, but the ones who dedicate their lives kind of almost exclusively to spiritual practice or work or whatever they're doing, I think they are incredible resources.
Yes.
Not to preach the religion so that everyone converts, but I guess to help other people who don't have that much time to dedicate to become their mentors. So yeah, sorry, it's a bit of a tangent, but I do think
no, it's a very, very relevant
religions
tangent.
still are needed for that.
That's absolutely right, and I think that this is where values come into it. These young people are not getting their values from their family.
Right.
They're searching for values.
Yeah.
Now, you raise that issue, like, say, and I'm going Christian again, but
right.
a Catholic priest, for example, actually marries God. In your case, what's that process? Do you and I raise this because of the significance of having people like yourself in these shared value groups. What's your process? Do you feel as though what's the commitment? You're marrying, does it go to that extent?
It doesn't really. I mean, we as a Buddhist monk, you do take certain vows related to that. But the commitment's really to your own self-actualization, your own enlightenment, for the benefit of others.
Right.
So you don't marry a church or an institution, but you do, I guess, make that heartfelt commitment in order to be of service to others, which is the main underlying motivation behind I guess monasticism.
Yes.
Is that altruism. It's got to be there. But I think from a values level, everyone sees that as important. So you don't need to give up a worldly life in order to live with that motivation. You can go to your work every day with that same motivation and by doing this work, I become of most benefit to others, you know. So
yeah, but there's power in you wearing a uniform.
There is.
Yeah. And I think that's basically it. If you look at law and order, we're all responsible for it, but having a policeman in uniform makes a bit of a difference to your interpretation of it.
It does.
So just getting back to the interaction, this is really quite exciting. So what are the activities that spin off from this? You were saying that you have...
Yep, we've done different projects in the past. The main project we're working on at the moment is called the Fast Supper. Right. Which is a bit of a pun on the Last Supper, which is it's a food van, but it's really about breaking down social isolation. So we arrive at the Housing Commission flat in South Melbourne with a hot meal, and everyone comes down, has the meal, shares it together, and it's an opportunity to connect with people and build bridges of understanding and meet one another. So to my mind, the main reason why we need projects like the Fast Supper and organisations like Interaction is because we need an opportunity to put our faith into practice and make it real and embody those values of compassion, which we're called to by our spiritual traditions. That's
inspirational, Freeman. Thank you very much for your time, and we've run out of it. So thank you very much, and we'll see you next week.
Shanti Om Allahu